Hi, I want to discuss a really thorny case that would take any of us a little while to unravel. What we have here is a series of photostats that catalog varying editions under both Boston Medical Library and Harvard Medical Library of the same work, Gifford's textbook of ophthalmology. This is a thorny but illustrative case for a couple of reasons. One is that there are many different call numbers at play in these records. Not all of them show up in ALMA. And another is that different editions were cataloged in ALMA under different author names. So it can take a little while to sort out what's going on. Let's begin by searching on the topmost call number, 28A491, a BML style BML call number, and one that, at least at the time that this card was printed, was used to catalog at least the 4th, 5th, 6th, possibly the 7th edition of this work as well. And what we see indeed is that that call number pulls up a number of different editions. There's a 1941 edition, 45, 38, 53, 57, 47. So going in order, we start with the 1947 edition. We see that there is an off-site Countway Holdings record for this work. In fact, that's all that we have. And indeed, I won't bother to demonstrate it, but there is a record in the main spreadsheet corresponding to this work under this Hollis number with that BML call number. Next, we can look for the 1953 edition. And there it is, evidently, also held off-site. And sure enough, when you look in the main spreadsheet, you will find this record and you can mark BML ownership accordingly. 6th edition is from 1957. There it is as well. And again, you're going to find that in the main spreadsheet. And from that point, things become more complicated. And we can regard at least this card as done. Well, we might want to take a look at the 1962 edition, the 7th edition of the work. But we will notice that there is no 1962 edition listed under this call number, at least available to discovery. And we can keep that in mind. We'll come back to that in a moment. The next thing that I would do as I'm going through these cards is try searching on these other call numbers. We've got another BML style BML call number, 28A503. Interestingly, it pulls up a work, but it does not pull up the work we're looking for. It pulls up a work titled A Handbook of Ocular Therapeutics. None of the other descriptive cataloging data corresponds, pagination, publisher. These do not correspond with what we're looking for. So if we are to find that record in Hollis, we would have to find it some other way. We could check each of these HML style BML call numbers, but at risk of letting this screencast run on a little too long, I will just go ahead and tell you the punchline, which is that none of these HML style BML call numbers will be found in Hollis, or for that matter, in ALMA. And there is an additional twist, which is that at least one of these records will be found in the spreadsheet under a different name than Francis Adler. In particular, the 1953 edition of the textbook of ophthalmology, under that original BML style BML call number that we looked at, will not be found under the name Francis Adler. So to explain, if we go back to the records that we pulled up under that call number, let us say the 1947 edition, if we search on that, that is to say, if we search on the MMS ID, the Hollis number for that work, the 1947 edition, it shows up under the name Francis Heed Adler. But you'll notice, if you look here under the works under that author name, you will find the 1947 edition and the 1957 edition. The 1953 edition doesn't turn up there. And another look at the Hollis record for the 1953 edition shows why. It's cataloged not under the name Francis Heed Adler, but under the name Sanford R. Gifford. And so when we search on the MMS ID for the 1953 edition, we discover it here under Gifford, Sanford R. And that nicely illustrates why I like to search by MMS ID, why I like to make my entry point into searching the Hollis catalog so that I can have in hand an MMS ID that I can use to search for individual records in the spreadsheet. Now, I'll close out by mentioning what I had to do to complete my handling of the rest of these records that you see here in these three photostats. I mentioned that none of these lower call numbers that are displayed on these lower two photostat cards correspond to any holdings record in ALMA. And I verified that exhaustively by searching in ALMA directly for these call numbers, and I was unable to find them. And so for each of these, it becomes necessary, even though these are records for works that were cataloged under this BML style BML call number, it still becomes necessary to account for these missing call numbers from ALMA, or from the spreadsheet, really, because that's the main criterion. If the call numbers don't correspond to or don't show up in records in the spreadsheet, then we make entries in the additional photostat items sheet. For 28A503, 28A1947-1, 28A1948-1, 28A1953-1, and 28M1957-1 to 2. And you can see here, I've created entries in the additional photostat items sheet for those copies under those missing call numbers. And there was one additional wrinkle that I had to make, which is that there is a 1948 reprinting which has slightly different descriptive cataloging data. It's a reprint of the 4th edition of 1947, but the pagination slightly differs. For what it's worth, the physical dimensions of the book are given slightly differently. Publication year is given differently. And for that reason, I entered the record in the additional photostat items sheet for this work with that additional information. There is no separate bib record for this reprint with the different cataloging data. So I am treating it as a different work, and I'm not linking the MMS ID for the 1947 edition to it. I'm treating it as something separate, and I made a note for that. And so finally, having done all of this, we can regard all of these records on these three photostats as having been dealt with.